Hi, guys. Welcome back to episode 5 of Two Girls, One Crime. I'm Emily,
Hello, I'm Megan.
and today we're going to be talking about the Black Dahlia case. So, we're excited,
One of
and
the faves, one of the most infamous, one might say.
exactly. So, we're going to chat about that today. Thanks for coming back and watching another episode or listening. So we're going to get into it.
Okay, so per usual, going through a little bit of the background before we jump into the actual crime itself, um, or at least a little bit of an overview. So starting off with the victim, Elizabeth Short. She was born July 29, 1924 in Medford, Massachusetts. So where our dear Emily is.
Massachusetts represent.
And she was the daughter of Cleo and Phoebe Short. When she was 5 years old, her father actually disappeared, and this was very interesting. Father disappeared. They found his car abandoned, and they believed that he had died by suicide. But then he later came back, and it was weird there where he was like, "I'm not ever gonna do that again." Ended up leaving, moving to the West Coast, which is super important for this entire story. Um, when she was 19, she became super passionate about movies, being in that community, Hollywood, and decided to move to, or at least go visit her father in California. Um, and we'll keep this in mind, but she was named the Black Dahlia, or this crime was called the Black Dahlia murder because of her dark hair. And she often wore black clothes, kept her hair very dark, that sort of thing. Little bit of background on kind of why she went there, like we said earlier. Anyways, little bit of background on um kind of right why she was there. Like I said previously, she went to go visit her dad. And then her dad was kind of like, "You're not doing anything with your life. You don't have a job. You're not in school." And in some ways, kind of kicked her out of his house. Um, and this was in 1947. And at the time, she was 22 years old. And that is kind of when we go into the actual crime itself.
Yes. So, this case itself took place in 1947, in January. So her body was found because there was a mother walking her children around in a neighborhood of Los Angeles, and they actually stumbled upon Elizabeth. Now we know, but a body of a young woman who was had no clothes on and was sliced clean in half at the waist. So her body was actually kind of placed in a mannequin like way, and she was on the sidewalk. So, again, there was no blood at the scene, which shows that she had been killed somewhere else and her body had been moved and placed in this kind of mannequin like way. We know now that it was Elizabeth Short, but back in the day, obviously, they did not. But they actually found out pretty quickly that it was her. 56 minutes after her body was found, she was identified through her fingerprints. So we know that her fingerprints were showed up twice in the FBI's collection. She applied for a job where she had to get fingerprints done, and she was also arrested for underage drinking, where she got her fingerprints done as well. So, since her fingerprints were in the databases, it was actually pretty easy to identify her, even though her body was mutilated. So, on January 9th of 1947, Elizabeth Short actually told one of her friends to drop her off at this hotel called the Biltmore Hotel, where she was waiting for her sister, I guess, to show up, and then she was never seen again. So that was on January 9th, and she was found on January 15th. So a couple
And
days in
also,
between there.
super interesting about the Biltmore Hotel. If you
Yes.
look this hotel up, first of all, it's a very famous hotel in Los Angeles. It's considered to be very haunted. This hotel in particular, I know this one was kind of not in the best part of town either. and it had like a bad rep as well. So that also kind of like leads into there's this hotel is apparently like haunted. There's crimes that happen there, drug deals, all that fun. Well, not fun stuff, but we get the gist.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Which
which
definitely I
is
feel like plays a part in everything that happened.
mm-hmm,
So, like we said, her fingerprints were found and she was identified. So, a little bit after her murder, there was actually a package that was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner that contained Elizabeth's address book and a lot of her personal belongings, and also a like note that was like cut out from newspaper letters that claimed to be the killer who sent this package. So again, the FBI searched prints for the letters in the papers, but whoever wrote these or cut these out or sent these, they were not in the database, so they were not able to be identified, unfortunately.
mm-hmm,
The FBI actually also searched people from the USC Medical School because of how precise the cuts were on her body. Like we said, she was cut at the waist. And the way that she was cut, everybody assumed that it was some type of medical professional or a surgeon or someone who clearly knew where and where not to cut a body. Especially like we assume that since there was no blood, obviously she was killed somewhere else and moved. But again, like not even bleeding out at all. So there definitely had to be some
mm-hmm.
precision there. So nobody's fingerprints from the School of Medicine identified or like got correlated to anything that was sent to the Los Angeles Examiner, and nobody was identified as the killer either.
Mm-hmm. I feel like this is also super interesting just because, like, it did happen again in the 1940s, and we've talked about multiple murders thus far that happened in different time periods where,
Yeah,
like, the most recent one with Robert Durst, right? It happened, 30 years ago, and then there's one that happened more recent where it's a little bit easier to kind of figure things out. With Jeffrey Dahmer, it took forever to figure it out. And you're in a big city, and like Los Angeles, it's a big city. She
yeah,
wasn't living there. She was kind of just crashing on her dad's couch.
yeah,
So it just, there's so many interesting points of like why it didn't get, why the murderer never got found. But at the same time, it's like, wouldn't you expect, like in the city of Los Angeles, to see somebody dropping a dead body? Or
right,
like,
right.
there's something.
Especially at, I believe it was 11 a.m. is when the mother and her children were walking. So clearly it had to have happened before that. And how did nobody before 11 find her either? It is like
Mm-hmm.
very puzzling to think about in all of these cases that are unsolved cases. It's hard to imagine that no evidence or nothing has pointed them to anybody.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the ones we've learned about thus far with like the letters or like they're sending cryptic notes to the police,
Yeah,
like the Zodiac killer, it or even Durst with that cadaver note, like
yeah,
how is there no movement of like, well, where did this come from? Like, can we
right.
figure out where it was dropped and like camera like it just I feel like is always kind of I feel like there's so many steps where this person could have gotten caught.
Yeah. Especially like now, like I sent out a package yesterday and like I had to show my identification. I had to like
Mm-hmm.
have my return address. So it is like crazy that I feel like, again, we sound like we're dating ourselves, but like now, like you need all of that information to like send packages like that, or like there's some way
Mm-hmm.
to track it back. So I think it is so interesting that, again, like no fingerprints were able to be found.
Yeah, there's
Like this,
nothing.
like none on her address book, none on any of her belongings. Like, I mean, I assume that that also means like no DNA was found. So
Mm-hmm. Well, and
it's
it's
just
like
crazy.
and it's hard with these murders, right, where it's like these did happen t- to a point like so long ago to where at this point it's like there's not a lot of info of like what's going on
Yeah.
or oh my god my words aren't working but there, there's not a lot of like info about kind of what happened,
Mm-hmm.
outside of maybe like little bits and pieces. Because I know even, and tell me what you think, Em, but like speaking from even doing research on it now, like there wasn't a lot. It just was kind of
Yeah.
like girl was found, like that's it. And even who
Yeah.
she was, like her family members are practically all gone, besides maybe
Yeah.
like distant relatives at this point in time.
Yeah, which I think that also we'll talk about the theories soon, but I think that also kind of correlated with the theories that we found because there weren't a lot of information on them either, and there were some that were like, "Oh, this one's a little more recent," or
Hmm.
it is hard since it was so long ago and back then there wasn't the technology there is now. So I think
Hmm.
it's just like extra hard to search, and like you said, like no cameras inside of like whatever, like there's cameras on every single block now. It's like who knows how
Hmm.
many there were then or if there were. So it's hard to think about, and like they only identified her because she applied for a job and was arrested for underage drinking, which that
Hmm.
actually made me think when I read that they found her through like her job interview or whatever, the fingerprints, because I've had to do that for things before, and I
Hmm.
was like, oh my gosh, like in my head I was like, oh, I'm not in the database, I haven't been arrested, but I was like, I am because I have gotten my fingerprints done, which like
Hmm.
scared me. I was like, oh my gosh, like
Yeah, and
ah.
it's interesting because it's like even from like minuscule things, like I had to get my fingerprint done to take my licensing exam,
Right.
and I had to get one for literally to do a job at like I believe a job at like a hospital where it's like little
Yeah,
things where it's like, okay, you're not doing it necessarily for maybe like a criminal background check. It's literally
absolutely.
just like, oh, like it just has it in the system. Like, is there anything that they can pull out? And
Yeah.
obviously, like that wasn't a thing, 30 years ago. I don't even know when it really became a thing where they didn't do like I'm thinking of like the detective kits where it's like they
Oh,
put
absolutely.
the
Yeah.
dust in
The
their pencil
powder.
exam.
Yes, of
Hmm.
course.
Yes,
Yes,
of
I did
course.
that in my forensics class in high school too. We would like put our fingerprints on the little glass panels and then we'd like use the little feather thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that was like really cool though, because again, we've seen that in like so many movies and shows. And so, like, just to be able to do it like for fun in a class was really cool. I also actually did this, which I'm surprised I haven't talked about yet, this summer camp. And it was like all about like crime or whatever.
What
I can't
the
remember the
heck?
exact name of it, but we would do like learn about like blood spatter analysis, and like we tried to
Was
make
this
our own
real?
crime scenes. Yes, this is real. I wonder if I have
So
pictures.
I
Wait,
think
let me find pictures. Hold
I
on.
think I just solved the Elizabeth Short Black Dahlia murder
It
because
was
Emily said we
me.
created her own crime scenes.
Wait, I actually need to find this now. Sorry.
For editing, we can put like photos on the screen just to show how in depth of a crime analyst she was.
Yeah, guys, I'll show
Um,
you.
like we said,
Anyways.
anyways, I feel like we needed to get off topic a little bit, but back
Yes,
to our
yes,
main point is like just
yes.
because there aren't a lot of information on
Mm-hmm.
this, it kind of just became just another murder.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of theories out there, but this is kind of one of those like Jack the Ripper type case, in my opinion, where it's so famous, but at the same time, it's like they've kind of given up on the theory aspect of it.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few that we found. The first one is, well, to preface, like we said, everyone was thinking that this was some medical personnel because of how
Mm-hmm.
precise the cuts on her body were. So the first and like one of the most well known and like more famous theories is that this doctor named Dr. George Hodel,
Mm-hmm.
was the one who actually murdered her. He was a doctor and he did have a sexual misconduct history, which again, there's no talk of there being any sexual misconduct in this case, especially DNA wise. So I don't know, but I think that kind of people sort of add that in to show like he could have done it because he's not a good person type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
but again, thought that it could be this doctor because of the medical precision on how she was murdered.
Mm-hmm.
He was the prime suspect in 1947, but was never really charged with anything, and there honestly wasn't a lot about him. Like we said before, since this was a while ago, there really wasn't a lot of information.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but he was one of the like most well-known and one of the more famous theories and thoughts to be who murdered her.
See, I feel like the doctor aspect is always like, I totally see it, but at the same time, it's like, okay, well, why this person, right? Like that's where
Right,
my mind always goes. It's like, okay, yeah, he obviously was not a good person, but at the same
right,
time, like, did he just find a random girl and like decide to kill her and like move on with his life? Like that's where it
right.
kind of gets into a weird territory of like he just had the urge to kill and then was like, I don't really like this and moved on.
Well, right. So that like that's what I was kind of trying to think about was because she wasn't like famous. She wasn't in anything yet. Like she was an
Hmm.
aspiring actress, but she wasn't like super duper well
No,
known.
she wasn't even an upcoming actress.
Right, right. So like it wasn't like he really was fascinated with her on the screen and whatever. So
Hmm.
it kind of goes back to that hotel that we were talking about. Like there wasn't a lot
Hmm.
of good activity through there. So again, we don't know, but it is kind of hard to think about like how was she correlated in any of this? Was it random? Was it
Hmm.
planned out? That type of thing. Um, so yeah,
Yeah, and
not so
I feel
good.
yeah, and I feel like again, I we haven't even written this theory down, but because she was charged for underage drinking, I believe it was
Hmm.
like at least a couple of months before she was murdered.
Hmm.
Um, like there could be that idea of maybe she got into drugs, right? And like
Yeah.
maybe some drug dealer just kind of took her, killed her, and threw her away. Maybe it was like there were gangs involved, like Em said again, it wasn't in the best area where she was found.
Yeah.
Um, but again, like that is just like a general theory, but I do think the doctor one is always very fascinating because it is like if I, not that I ever would, but like if I'm thinking about like even if I was to look at myself and be like, okay, well, where do I cut like in half so it's just clean?
Right.
Uh, like I couldn't even tell you necessarily
Right.
like where it would be that I don't like mess anything up.
Exactly. Yeah,
Hmm.
I feel like that is why the doctor theory is so prominent because like the average person doesn't know that. Like I took
Yeah.
anatomy, I guess, but like I wouldn't know that at
Yeah, and
all.
like realistically on your body, like everybody's
Yeah.
body is different. So it's at least
Right.
having an idea of like, oh, well, where would it be on like the
Right.
average person?
And like experience with that if they are a doctor too. So
Mm-hmm.
that is a fascinating um, thought. Another one that is more of a suspect more recently. His name was Marvin
Mm-hmm.
Margulis.
Yeah.
He was a pre med student who actually dated Elizabeth Short. And this is fascinating because he actually changed his name.
Like after the killing?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he changed his name afterwards, and there's a police sketch from 1992, I believe it is, where the picture very much resembles him. And again, he
Mm.
dated Elizabeth Short, he was a pre med student, and the police sketch resembles him, and he changed his name. Which, again, there wasn't a lot of information, but I thought the changing name part was very odd.
Well, and I feel like the only reason, because you read of like Chris Watts, right?
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know, brief overview in like
We could do him one
2017,
week, too.
we could do him one week,
Hmm.
but a very brief overview for my point.
Yeah.
He killed his pregnant wife and two children because he was in an affair, kind of wanted to start a new life, but he's
Yeah.
crazy. But
That
the
documentary gave me chills.
that one was bad.
Yeah.
Well, it was really good, but it was horrible to watch. But the
Yeah.
mistress changed her name. But again,
Yeah.
social media was super prominent. Like
Yeah.
everybody knew who she was, or at least like if
Right.
you've heard of the case, they had an idea of who she was. And to this day, it's like if you go and Google her, it will be like she changed her name, like maybe pictures of her out and about. But it's like, oh, well, because she changed her name, it's like a maybe.
Right.
So why in 1992 would you change your name when social media isn't a thing?
Right.
Like, you have no reason unless it's like you're trying to kind of hide something.
Exactly. And I think it's interesting that I'm so sorry. I do think that it's interesting that he was a pre-med student and that they
Mm-hmm.
dated. Because again, like we talked about with the doctor, like how did he find her? Like again, we just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So with it being someone who was possibly in her life, I think that that is super crazy and
I
like really intriguing.
Yeah, I do have a question because I didn't know this and Em did the research on these little theories, so shout out to Emily. But why did the police sketch come out in 1992? Do you know?
I don't I don't I don't
If
know.
if you don't know, that's fine. I just was like, that is how many, again, math is not our strong suit, but it's almost like
Math is not our
it's like 40, I
no.
believe it's 40 years after the murder came out, correct? Because if it happened in like
Right.
47, 93 or 92, we're like
Yeah.
teeter-tottering on 50 years.
Right. Which we're gonna actually get into this in the frequently asked questions, but I just looked up more about him because I was just trying to see if there was anything else.
Hmm.
And we're going to talk about this later, but actually there was kind of a idea that the Zodiac killer was the same like person who killed her, like how there
Hmm.
was like there's no real evidence or nothing really supported, but I thought it
Yeah.
was interesting because we did just talk about that.
Hmm.
But they were around the same time, kind of. So I looked up his name once more, and it said like perhaps like Californians were again terrorized by the Zodiac killer, and this case, and it brought his name into it. Which hold on, now I'm trying to find. So his name was Marvin Margolis, like we said. He was in the army.
Hmm.
He then changed his name. He went by a pseudonym Marvin Merrill.
When he
He,
changed his name.
yes.
Okay.
So his name now is Marvin Merrill, but he was Marvin Margolis when he dated Elizabeth Short.
Mm.
So I I really there's not a lot about this man, but I do think that it is very odd that even when you look up his name, it even talks about the Zodiac killer and him in this case also,
Maybe
and
he
that there was
was
such
the
a connection
Zodiac
here.
killer. Have we
Well,
ever thought
right,
about
like
that?
it's
I
and
think
like
we could
even when we
solve two
look that up,
murders.
look at us go. Even when we look like we were talking about the Zodiac killer, like his name didn't really come up. So I just think it's interesting like how much of a like odd
Mm.
connection there is. And again, we'll circle back to it, I guess, with when we get into frequently asked questions. But the red lipstick murder was also around the same time, and they think maybe the same killer was responsible for Jean French, who got killed. She was similarly mutilated and put in the same positions a month after in Los Angeles. So again, there's all these
Mm.
like kind of connections that they could be connected, and like we talked about with Jeffrey Dahmer, there are probably a lot more that were probably honestly just not connected back to him. So I am wondering like if there were more that were connected in this Black Dahlia case that weren't, it maybe was actually a serial killing versus just for Elizabeth.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I thought that was
That is
interesting.
very interesting.
It's very
Very
odd.
odd. I do think, like, I don't know. It's just so curious. That is very interesting that those are connected, and it's like, when
Yeah.
was the
Or even talked about being
yeah,
connected,
well, when
like,
was the Zodiac
which is
killer
strange.
was in the 60s, right? Okay, so like
Yes.
theoretically, it could have been similar to Jeffrey Dahmer, where it was like person killed her, took a break for 10 years like he did, and
Yeah.
then he like kind of ramped it up when he moved to Milwaukee. Maybe it's a similar idea of like this guy murdered her and he was like,
Yeah.
ooh, and then finished medical school and then just was like, kind of had that itch in there still. And I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's,
Which I think would be interesting because it could be Elizabeth um, in
hmm
1947. And then if it was this lipstick murder a month later, and then like after medical school, let's say, perhaps the Zodiac killings as well.
interesting.
So who knows? But we're here to talk about our thoughts. So we're talking about our
hmm
thoughts. Yeah. Craziness. Um, so there is one more theory that we found, which was this man named Leslie Dillon, who was actually a pretty strong suspect from the LAPD in the 1940s after this
hmm
case, so I guess almost the 50s. He was a bellhop at the hotel, and he was a mortician's assistant and an aspiring writer. So, kind of, he has a lot of connections all over. Um, he actually had like written to the LAPD psychiatrist about these
hmm
murders. I don't know exactly in what extent, but he was reaching out trying to figure out information, which I think is interesting, especially to the psychiatrist, not even just, like a detective or something. Um, and again, he was not charged with anything either, but I do think it's interesting the connections of the bellhop to the
hmm
hotel, a mortician's assistant, so he knows some
hmm
medical stuff, and he was a writer, so he, like, had a probably, I imagine, a good imagination, and he was, like, creative, so I wonder if he was, kind of trying to think all of these things out,
Yeah,
but
and theoretically,
again,
like, it could have just been some guy who was just curious and, like, obviously, like, it's, you
absolutely.
can think of it as, like, the documentaries we watched today, right? Where it's like they're not involved in the murders, but they find them really fascinating and, like,
Mm-hmm.
interesting enough to talk about. So it could have just been that, but it is, I do
Right.
find it really interesting that he wrote to an the LAPD psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Just like it just is kind of random.
Right. Yeah, like a detective or like someone leading
Yeah,
the
just like
case.
a normal
Sure, I
reporter,
guess.
right?
Right, right. So that I also found for sure interested. And that he was a bellhop at the
Yeah,
hotel.
that is it's very
Weird.
interesting, and I feel like the only way I could see is like, well, did you see her at all? And like, that's
Right.
what's happening here, and why you feel the need to reach out because you're just really curious, or like maybe he saw her but like wasn't coming forward with the information out of fear. Like, who
Right.
knows?
Yeah. And that happens in a lot of cases where it's like people know information but they don't want to get in trouble
hmm
or something like that. So who knows? Again, this did happen a while ago, and again, there's not a lot of information about any of these theories,
hmm
honestly, especially because no one was arrested or
And you
caught
know
for
what?
them or
That's why we're
charged.
talking about
So
hypotheticals today of like, well, why and why not?
right,
Because A, we need to make an episode, and B, it is
right,
kind of fun to like work through those and be like, okay, well, like this makes sense
mm-hmm.
versus this not making sense. So,
Right. And like this is what we do like normally
you know,
whenever we watch
they
something.
are
So
getting a
you
deep
guys are really
dive
just getting a little
into
look.
our
They are.
brains.
They are.
Um,
They are.
So I guess kind of with that going forward, we always try to end our episodes or at least do a little bit of a
Mm-hmm.
deep dive. And again, this is a little bit shorter of an episode for viewers who are new. And hopefully you've made it this far. Great time to kind of deep dive into something, get a little started. But either way,
Mm-hmm.
starting with just a review, right? Who is the Black Dahlia? Elizabeth Short. She was a aspiring young actress. Keeping in mind, she was not a famous actress of any kind. She became famous for
No.
the murder.
Aspiring.
Um,
Yeah.
moved to LA. It's unclear because there's she moved to LA versus she was kind of crashing with her dad and visiting. Either way, she was
Yeah.
living out there, and she was given this nickname shortly after the murders because of her dark hair, dark clothing she wore,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a big reason. Um, we have
Yeah.
talked about a couple of the theories or suspects out there, but a big question out there is how many
Mm-hmm.
suspects were there in this case? And even though we mentioned the three that were kind of the most prominent, there were over 500
Yeah.
suspects that were investigated, and this included doctors, anyone with surgical skills, again, like Ann said, due to the way the body was found. Um, and this list is extensive, right? I'm sure there are people out there that were just near her during the time, so they're
Yeah.
meeting, talking about it. Um, but 500 people, and again, I'm sure there were more, but this happened like technically, I don't know, like over like 60,
This
70,
happened in the
70 years
40s.
ago. Yeah,
Yeah.
70 years ago.
I think
80 years ago.
80 because it's the 20s now and it was the 40s then,
One of these
right?
days, I'm gonna do math before we start filming, and then I'm gonna be like, "Oh, don't
I think we said that a
forget."
few weeks ago and we
I
still.
hope the viewers,
It's okay, guys. You're just getting the real us. We're not
we
performative
really
here.
aren't. But anyways, I'm sure there are much more than 500 out there, but these are just a couple, and
Yeah.
the
And a lot of them weren't
no,
doctors or anyone with medical experience. That I think was just more touched on because of how her body was
mm-hmm.
found. Again, there was like, I mean, they did interview or like
Mm-hmm.
investigate the whole like USC medical school, but also a lot on the just USC campus, a lot in the Los Angeles area. Again, LA is a big city,
Mm-hmm.
so probably they interviewed a bunch of people in the hotel. So again, it's a mix of people. They just really focused on the medical
Yes.
professionals.
Um, the next one, again, we've mentioned this a million times. This case was never solved. There has been no
Yep.
leads. There has been nothing. It's kind of just come to a dead end over the last, 80 years. And it's just kind of one of those infamous
Yep.
cases that keeps a lot of crime, yeah,
Wasn't
wasn't solved,
solved.
keeps a lot of crime enthusiasts
Yep.
engaged, and is just one that kind of like, again, Hollywood star that was killed. So that's why that one is really big.
Yeah.
Um,
It's also hard because, like we've said a million times, there's just not a lot of
no.
information. And especially because it is unsolved and there's no suspect that was caught. Like, it's really hard to get any
Mm-hmm.
background. Like, again, social media wasn't a thing. So it's like we can't even deep dive into what her social media pages
No.
were, like anything like that, obviously. So it's hard to. That is, again, why we're talking about these theories and our ideas because it hasn't been solved. So we really don't know the actual true answer, and we never
Mm-hmm.
will, likely. So I think it's interesting to talk about these that are
Yeah.
unsolved.
And then again, final one. We answered a lot of these questions today, but did the killer kill
Yeah.
anyone else? And that is a big maybe. M touched on the red lipstick murderer. And some research suggests that the same killer was responsible for the murder of Jeanne French. Am I saying that right? Janine?
Jean.
Was responsible for the murder of Jean French, who was found similarly
Yeah.
mutilated a month later. And then again, the Zodiac killer. Some push that these were both the same killer. No real evidence, not supported by law enforcement. It is very crazy that we talked about the Zodiac killing, I believe, 2 weeks ago. Um,
Yeah.
but I also think we can even throw into the loop here, right? This Marvin guy, maybe he was the Zodiac killer,
Yeah.
and just there was never a
Yeah.
connection there, or they had too much on their plate at the time, and we're like, oh, we can't interview him.
Yeah, which I'm like so curious why they didn't interview him for the red lipstick one as
Mm-hmm.
well, because it was like such a similar case and just a month later in the same
Mm-hmm.
city. So that is definitely curious, like something I'm curious about, which maybe we'll look into that one
Mm-hmm.
day, but I thought that was very interesting because it was so close to when Elizabeth Short got murdered and it was like so
Yeah, and
similar
it's
of a
just
case.
like I think again the really hard thing with these when we talk about them is like there's not enough
Yeah.
information on them. So it is in some ways like hard because it's not like we can go watch a documentary to hear what the investigators were
Right.
doing at the time because a lot of them are gone. So who knows what was going through their head, but truly they're
It's a lot of like like he
Mm-hmm.
say, not he said.
He said, she said.
It's a lot of like, that's kind of what I was going for. It's a lot of just like vocal like stories that are being
Yeah.
told because again, no social media, obviously the news and newspapers, but like a lot of those you can't get access to
Yeah.
now. So it's a lot of like kind of, and who knows, maybe there is more information that again has been like buried since we're now
Mm-hmm.
looking now, but like again we just don't know because it hasn't been, you know, written down or in a documentary or anything that we've been able to
Yeah.
find.
And you never know. Maybe we'll do a deep dive or something will come back up where we'll have to go back into this. But for
Yeah.
now, it will be the infamous Black Dahlia murder that remained a mystery.
Yeah. It's so crazy. And like, do we know like who named her that?
I
Was that
think
like
it
the
just was
media
kind of
or
like
was
the
that
media. I believe from my research on why they named
mm-hmm.
her that, it was just kind of like this thing that started. It was just a trend, if you want to
Mm-hmm.
call it that, where people started calling it like the Black Dahlia, and that was kind of what it
Yeah.
became today.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
interesting. And like I always wonder if like names like that or the red lipstick
Mhm.
murder, like are those names intentional somehow? Like
Yeah,
we just don't know. Like,
that's a good question.
and that's hard like when it's like obviously the media, but like if it was written like in like a note to the police or something, like even the Zodiac killer who named himself
Hmm.
that. So it is interesting to think about like is it just because of her looks, which it
Hmm.
probably is, but still interesting to think
Yeah.
about all the different angles of it for
Hmm.
sure.
I agree, but for now, we'll have to sign off in an I don't know. Um,
I know.
but with that being said, again, a little bit shorter of
Mm-hmm.
a uh, session, if you want to call it that today. I don't know. I was gonna say podcast, but then I was like, this idea is a podcast. But either way, appreciate you all for tuning in.
Anyways,
I hope you guys enjoyed kind of hearing
yes.
us work through some of these things, some theories, and hearing just a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more about it. Again,
Yeah.
like always, feel free to comment if there's one in particular that you want us to deep dive because
Yes.
we do read those and we actually have those kind of on the docket for the ones we're going to talk about in the future. Um, whether it
Yes.
be
We'll
Spotify.
definitely take your guys' suggestions
Please,
for
it's
sure.
very fun for us to learn about this, and this is very fun. So we
Mm-hmm.
love suggestions on ones we've never heard of before.
Absolutely. Yes, we appreciate you guys listening. Thanks for being fans. We love you all, and we'll see you next
Yes, we
week.
will. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye, guys.